All right, everybody, welcome to Navigating Your Nest Egg. Confidently save, invest, and plan for your retirement at every age and every stage with the MoneySwell Retirement Planner. In terms of today's agenda, I'll give you a brief introduction. I have just a really quick reminder, and then we're going to dive into talking about retirement. We're going to talk about some retirement icebreaker questions, and then we will do a detailed demo. And then last but not least, we'll have a Q&A at the end if there are any questions, a wrap up, and special offer. So thank you for being here if you're watching it live, and definitely thank you for being here as well if you are watching this on replay. So my name is Ryan Lillis. If you've watched any of my other webinars before, I always say the only thing you really need to take away from this slide is that my background is in user experience design, which is all about creating experiences that people love and that make sense to them in the digital world. And my professional passion is building software that helps people create and sustain healthy habits. So there are four major components of MoneySwell. There is the assets and liabilities tool, which is a way to show all of your accounts in one place. There is a budgeting tool, which is all about short-term money management, of course. And we have a webinar that we just completed not too long ago on that. So definitely feel free to check that out. Of course, we have a retirement planning tool, which is the focus for today's webinar, and that is all about long-term goals and planning. And then, of course, MoneySwell has a very significant financial education component, which is designed to give each individual user the right content at the right time in their financial journey so they can be empowered as they make decisions along the way. Okay, so let's talk about retirement. To get started, I have a few retirement icebreakers. And as you sit there and are watching this, I want you to ask yourself the following questions. So the first question is, have you ever used a retirement calculator before? Probably most of you are thinking, yeah, I have, or maybe some of you are thinking I haven't, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Now, if you did, do you know or remember your goal retirement nest egg number? What is that goal that you were trying to get to in terms of, I want this much in retirement savings at the time that I start my retirement? When I've asked this question to people that I've been meeting with or at lunch and learns, oftentimes people say they do not remember this number. Third question, do you know how much you need to save annually to hit your nest egg number by your desired timeline? And I can tell you that when we've asked this question before, oftentimes people say they don't know. And they try, if they're in the best case scenario, typically, they're actually just sort of shooting for some sort of basic percentage, but they don't really know if that's going to get them where they want to go. And then lastly, are you confident that you will never need to calculate those numbers again? And if you've watched the promo, you already have a sense of how I'm probably going to answer this, but just hold on to that thought and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Now, before we talk about this, the takeaways I have from these questions, I want to give you a quote from a retiree. There was so much that was unknown. I didn't have a clear sense of what we would need or if we were on track. And again, this is a quote from a current retiree who, as they described, experienced decades of kind of this low-grade anxiety leading up to retirement. But then once they actually got in retirement and, in the final years leading up to retirement, they started working with a certified financial planner, and they actually felt much more confident. So based on this quote and the questions that I asked before and many of the answers that I've gotten when I've talked to people about those questions, I've got three takeaways. So the first takeaway is that fear of the unknown, or also sometimes just general anxiety about the future, it's typically worse than just sort of looking at the reality and diving in. So it's not great. It's not a great place to be living in this space of fear and worry and anxiety. And so oftentimes, regardless of where our financial situation is, it's really nice to just see it up front in black and white or whatever colors you happen to be looking at, and just dive in, just understand those numbers and see where you sit and make a plan moving forward. Secondly, it's really nice to acknowledge that there's going to be things that are out of our control. And when, we can't predict market performance. We can't necessarily predict the job market or things like that. But what we can do is acknowledge that those things are out there, that they're out of our control, and we can make adjustments, right? So if we have a plan and we're constantly making minor adjustments along the way based on the reality that we're faced with, that's a really nice place to be. And then lastly, planning for retirement, as I sort of hinted at in the answer to the last question, it's not an event, right? This isn't just something that you do once when you're 20 or 25, and then 40 years later or 10 years later, whenever it is that you're hoping to retire, you just say, oh, yep, I did my calculations 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I'm good, right? That's not how retirement planning works. Retirement planning is a practice and it's a process. It's something that we should be doing regularly and it evolves over time. And one of the things that I'm so excited about in terms of the MoneySwell Retirement Planner tool is we designed it with that in mind. Most other retirement planners out there, they're not doing that, right? They're basically number crunching calculators that are going to spit out some numbers for you, and those numbers may be helpful, but they're not really designed to help address some of these other components that we talked about in these other two questions. This fear of the anxiety about the future, and then also just acknowledging that you need to have a process around it so you can make adjustments along the way. So with that as our preamble, we're going to dive into a detailed demo. Before we get into the detailed demo, though, just a quick reminder. If you're looking for the quick demo, we've got a MoneySwell Retirement Planner playlist that goes over each of the components of the retirement planner. They're much quicker than this full webinar, of course, but you can find those to be very helpful. And then also watch those same videos directly in the application. So if you sign up for MoneySwell and you want to understand, okay, how does the retirement planner work? Those videos are going to be right at your fingertips when you're there. So with that, I will jump over to our retirement planner. Okay, so the first thing I want you to note about our tool is that we have these three tabs across the top. We've got step one, step two, and step three. And this sort of general format is true within our other tools as well. So it should be quite familiar. Within assets and liabilities, we have sort of a tabbed layout. And within budget planner, we have a tabbed layout too. The only thing that's really different about the retirement planner tabs is we give you a little bit more information. So we're kind of telling you what the purpose of this tab is. So again, my info, step one, it's all about filling out some basic personal information, and then similar sort of descriptions for step two and step three. You'll also notice we have a percentage complete bar. And the reason for this is that retirement planner is designed to be done again. It's a practice, it's a process. And so there are going to be components of the retirement planner which you will be prompted, and you can see a little prompt here on the left with a little red bubble. You will be prompted to update certain components of it on an annual basis and then other components of it on a monthly basis. And so as you get prompted to update tasks, this percentage complete bar will update. And you'll always know if you're where you need to be based off of, again, these red bubbles or the percentage of tasks complete. So let's dive into the My Details tab, and you can expand. Most of the time they're going to be open by default, but just to make it clear sort of how we break it out, I've collapsed them for the moment. So let's expand My Details. Pretty straightforward here, right? You're going to enter your name, your birthday. You're going to put in a goal retirement age. If you're one of these FIRE people, financially independent, retire early, if that's your mindset, and you're 30 years old and you want to retire at 40, fantastic, put in 40. If you're more traditional and you're thinking you're going to retire at a much later age, put in that age. Whatever the age is, it doesn't really matter. The retirement planner is going to help you understand whether or not you're realistically on track for those. The only other thing I'll note about this, and I always think this is so fascinating. So, occasionally you'll hear people say things like, "Oh, I'm going to work until I die," right? Like that there's just no hope for me to retire, or I love my job and I'm going to do this. And if that's your mindset, like, great, more power to you. But I want you to be aware of something that's really important. The average retirement age in the United States is around 62 years old. And it's not 62 because people hit 62 and they're like, oh, I have enough money. This is where I want to be. More often, people are retiring at age 62 or around there, or that's the average, because circumstance has put them in that situation. So maybe they lost their job and they can't get another one, and they're around that age. Maybe their health fails them and they're physically unable or mentally unable to be able to continue to do that job. And then another one that is very common, but oftentimes not thought about. Many times people have a partner, whether it's a loved one, maybe even a child. There's many different circumstances where this can happen, but where somebody needs to actually quit their job to be a full-time caretaker for somebody in their family. So I put that out there as a reminder about some of the data in terms of what we see with retirement. Age, if you want to work till 80, great, but don't expect that you're going to be able to do that. I know people that have worked past 80 and it was a great experience for them and it was very much worthwhile, but that is a luxury that many people don't actually end up having if they want that. So put in something that you think is realistic, but just keep that in the back of your mind. 62 is when people tend to retire, whether or not they have the money to or not at that point. That's when they tend to stop working. All right, gross annual household income. This is exactly what it states. If you don't know this, there's a couple things to keep in mind. So throughout MoneySwell, we always have a little bit of basic details if you hover over these question mark icons. So again, this is a reminder. Gross income is before taxes and other deductions are taken out. And if you're unsure about, okay, how do I figure out what my gross income is? If you expand this learn more box, you can see we have a bit of additional text, but you can also read some of the articles that we have linked here, which talk about easy ways to estimate that. Most typically, if you're in sort of a salaried position, you're going to be getting paid once every other week or twice a month. So you can just look at any individual pay stub and you can multiply your gross number on that paycheck by either 24 if you're paid twice a month or 26 if you're paid every other week, because obviously not every month is exactly 4 weeks. But again, you can look at some examples there. If you don't make a paycheck and you're making a lot of your money in tips or in sort of other sort of gig work or something like that, obviously you'll need to do a little bit of work to calculate what your typical gross income is, but that's certainly a doable exercise. And then for annual household expenses, we do have a little bit of help text here to estimate. Just review your statements, look at your year-end summaries from your bank or credit card companies. If you're using the MoneySwell budget planner and you've been using it for several months, you'll probably have a really great idea of what your annual household expenses are. Now, obviously, if you only have 1 or 2 months of data, there may be other expenses that come out less frequently, maybe every 6 months, or maybe even less frequently than that, which can be significant contributors to your total household expenses. But one of the reminders that we had in our budgeting planning webinar is if you have no idea, the budgeting tool asks you the same question, but you can just make a totally random guess. If you use it for 3 months or 4 months, you're going to start to dial in a really accurate picture of what your expenses are. So that's another way to do it, is just use the budget planner tool, start with a guess for what your expenses will be, and then actually pull in the data, download that transaction data from your banks, your credit cards, and you'll be able to get that number pretty quickly. All right. So those are the basic details. If you have a partner, you can certainly add them as well. It only asks for their name, their birthday, and their retirement age. It doesn't ask for any of the income or expense statistics, because the idea is that it's household income that's previously been asked for in the main section. So that should include your income plus your partner's if you have one, or your expenses plus your partner's if you have one, or obviously your whole family if you have children or something like that. Okay, so that's the first section. That's my details. That's pretty straightforward. This section, you'll be asked to update gross annual household income and annual household expenses twice a year. So again, that's that process part of it. Your numbers and your nest egg need projections, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, are always going to be based off of these kind of core components. So by updating them every year, your nest egg need estimates will also update. Assets and income, there's just two things, really just one potential input here, but the first is it's going to pull in your retirement account data. So these accounts here, so in this case, we always work with our fictional character, Beatrice, and this is dummy data. That's something I should also say. There's nothing in here that's real data from a real person. This is just sort of fictionalized data just for the purposes of our demonstration. But you should see all the retirement accounts that you've added within the assets and liabilities tool. So if you don't see something that you expect to see, then go back to assets and liabilities and confirm that that given account has a retirement label. And similarly, if you see an investment account that you have that you do not consider to be a retirement nest egg or part of what would be your retirement nest egg, you don't have to have it here. Just change the label from retirement to other investment. So again, we're pulling all this information in from what you entered in assets and liabilities. If you don't see anything here, it just means you haven't added anything, and it'll have a link to have you do so. Under additional monthly retirement income, you can put whatever you want here. Again, we always have a little bit more detail. So examples include Social Security, rental income, maybe a retirement side job, etc. If you want your Social Security estimate, go to ssa.gov. It'll tell you what it thinks that you will get. Obviously, there's a certain amount of uncertainty about Social Security. There were some recent headlines, even just the other day, talking about, whether or not all 100% of those funds will be there to draw down. It's not going to go away. There's just too much political pressure there, and I'm not going to get into too many details there. But there's too many retirees that are counting on that income, so there will be something. But it's certainly possible that it may be less than what you expect. So I always like to be a little conservative here. If it tells you, I mean, I'm just using fake numbers here, but if it tells you, oh, you're going to get $1,500 a month in retirement income, and you want to be on the safe side in terms of estimating, just drop that number down a little bit. Whatever income sources you have, and again, you can add as many as you like, make sure that it's something that you expect to be relatively consistent and durable. And by that I mean, if you're going to work, if you're going to retire but maybe still do some sort of side gig job that brings in meaningful income, but you're only going to do that for a couple of years, maybe it's some sort of passion hobby or something like that, I wouldn't necessarily add that into your retirement income, because your retirement may last, depending on when you retire, it may last 20, 30, 40 years. So only really consider income that is meaningful and is likely to last for a substantial period of your retirement years. All right, so that's the first tab. You can click to go to Goals and Outlook by clicking this button down here, or of course, you can just click the tab at the top. So that's what we'll do. And let's talk about how this is set up. So there are parts of Goals and Outlook which you're going to update once a year, and those should be fairly straightforward. And then there are going to be parts where you can update as often or as infrequently as you like, but you'll be prompted to do so once a month. Under Goals in Progress, just collapse this section down here. So Goals in Progress is our first section. And you can see that you have 3 different goals. This is where you set, how much do I think I can save this year? And the way I like to think about the minimum goal is almost no matter what, asteroid hitting the Earth, maybe doesn't count, but under most normal-ish circumstances, you're going to do everything you can to try to save this minimum number, no matter what. You think you can really do that. Target number is sort of under, hey, normal circumstances. If my job stays the same, if my expenses stay the same, this is the amount that I expect to hit under sort of normal circumstances. And then stretch, that's a goal that you're setting under kind of your best case scenario. So Beatrice here, she's like, okay, no matter what, I want to try to save 5,000. My goal is 10,000. That's kind of my real goal. And maybe if I make a little bit more money this year than I'm expecting to, or maybe if my expenses are a little bit less than I expect to, I think I might be able to save, best case scenario, around $12,000. One thing I would also note is don't worry whether your savings are coming from pre or post-tax dollars. And that's something we can talk about more maybe in another webinar. But for ballpark planning, it's totally fine to just set a goal based on the dollar amount you want to save. Now, of course, if you're curious to learn a little bit more about what it means to save with pre-tax versus post-tax dollars and what the implications are for, both during your retirement savings years as you plan for and save for retirement, or during your years in retirement where you're pulling those funds out, definitely check out the MoneySwell blog or the articles in your MoneySwell action plan. Again, the action plan being your financial priorities action plan, to get a little bit better understanding of what that means. So we sort of restate that here under the Learn More section. But again, for broad planning purposes, we don't want you to worry about that right here. We're just asking you what is the dollar amount, regardless of whether or not it's done with pre or post-tax dollars. So this is the section you're going to update once a year. You can change these numbers, of course, but I would suggest try to set numbers that are realistic and then see where you end up landing. Tracking your year-to-date numbers is pretty straightforward. So again, you're going to update your household income and your retirement contributions. Again, you'll be asked to update these numbers once a month, but you could, if you wanted to, you could just update these numbers once a year. And the total output of their tool is going to be no different as long as your numbers are accurate for the particular year that you've selected. So if you just update this once at the end of the year, you're still going to have a completely accurate tool. But as you or your retirement projections are going to be completely accurate. But as you go through the year, if you're looking at your achievements versus goals, which we'll take a look at in just a second here, it's only these numbers are only going to be as accurate as however up to date your numbers are here. So again, you can look at this number, year-to-date household income. We remind you here that it should be your gross income. And also, you can just look at this number from a pay stub. There's going to be a place that tells you your year-to-date numbers. Year-to-date contributions. This is a number that you can get. Typically, probably the best place to get it is going to be from your actual retirement provider's website. So if you have multiple accounts at different institutions, you'll want to take a look at that and see, okay, how much did I contribute to this one? How much did I contribute to that one? You can also look in your pay stub, but just remember, if your pay stub tells you something like, oh, you contributed $1,000 to this point to, let's just say, your 401k, many companies will have a company match. And that match is not going to be shown on your paycheck. That match will be shown, however, on the retirement provider's website. Sometimes there's a few days, maybe you make the contribution with your paycheck, and then that match doesn't come in until a later point in time. But just take a look at what that number is and then validate it at the end of the year to make sure that you got the full match that you were expecting. Current value of retirement accounts, this is grayed out because this again is pulled in automatically based off of when you sync in assets and liabilities across all your tools. And if it doesn't look up to date, you can always just click this. It'll take you right there and you can make those updates. All right, under achievements versus goals, we have two charts here. We have your savings rate and your contributions versus goals. So savings rate, I really like this one because what it's doing is it's giving you a percentage of how much of your current income have you saved. And when that's super helpful because you can also see up here. So for Beatrice, I think I've stated that her goal is to make 100. Her expected income for the year is 100,000, and we can just validate that real quick. Yeah, so she put in 100,000. So nice, easy math here. So her goal for gross income for the year is 100,000. So obviously, by saving $5,000, that equates to 5%. $10,000 is 10%, and 12 is 12%. And then she can see based off of how much she's currently made through the year and how much she's currently saved, where that gets her in terms of her actual or current savings rate. What I like about this chart is that, and again, if we expand our Learn More section over here, we can see our reminder text, but experts generally recommend saving and again, investing those dollars between 10 and 15% of your gross income annually. So this is a nice sort of gut check based on those rules of thumb. 5%, that's her minimum goal. Okay, that's probably not going to be enough if she does that, for a long, long period of time. But 10 or 12%, okay, so the goals she set are sort of within reason, especially for target and stretch, based off of what experts typically recommend. So that's sort of a nice check there. Contributions versus goals, very straightforward. It's literally showing you the dollar amount. So she can see, okay, she's made some nice progress. She's surpassed her $5,000 minimum, and she's getting close to her $10,000 target goal as well. Still has a little bit ways to go to get to 12,000 stretch. So again, just a visual representation. If you don't update your year-to-date numbers in these two cells above every month, again, these charts are only going to be as accurate as the data that you've provided it with. So you can update those whenever you want, but you'll be prompted to do so on a monthly basis. Now, let's talk about future outlook. So this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. So what's the value of this chart? So let's talk about what it's telling you. It's saying, based on how much I already have in my nest egg, and again, we have this starting value. We'll talk about that in a second. But based on how much I already have in my nest egg, are this year's savings goals going to get me to my expected nest egg needs by my desired retirement timeline? And a little bit more precisely, it's also going to tell you, based on your expected rate of return, how much money in today's dollars will you have in a given year if you continue to save every year at the same values you're planning to save for this year. Now, that might sound like a lot, so I want to break it down, and it should make sense by the end if it doesn't already. So the starting value, this is a number. Again, this is a non-editable field. If you do click here to edit it, it's going to take you back to your assets and liabilities tool and give you the chance to edit your historical record. But this number is going to be pulled in from January 1st of the current year. So in this case, Beatrice had $48,500 across all of her retirement accounts on January 1st. The expected rate of return, we're going to talk about this more in a second on the summary tab, but the expected rate of return, you can select anything from 0 to 10%. And there's a reason why we have only those numbers. But if you're not sure what to put, adjusted for inflation, common estimates in terms of like what a financial planner might work with you on or something like that, they're going to range between 5 and 8%, depending on how aggressively your portfolio is invested. Now, of course, this is an estimate, right? Nobody really knows what the market's going to do in the future, but based on historical averages, these are the numbers that experts typically recommend. If you have no idea, I like to start with 7. It's a sort of slightly conservative number in the sense that it's telling you your portfolio will probably grow a little more slowly than it might actually. But again, it all depends on how you're invested. So we can talk about that more in a bit. Your savings goals, again, these are just pulled in from based off of what you entered up here at the top. So minimum 5, target 10, stretch 12. You can see those mimicked right here. And then we start to tell you about your nest egg needs. So we project 3 different values. And we're going to talk about this more on the final tab, but at a minimum, it's saying Beatrice will need $1.3 million in order to be able to retire. Sorry, I just noticed we've got we don't have a partner's age here. So that's why I'm going to just make a quick change here. We're going to remove the partner and then we'll get rid of these, we had some null values coming in there because we had added a partner, but hadn't added their name. So at a minimum, Beatrice is going to need $1.3 million. At sort of a middle income or a nest egg need projection, she's going to need 1.5. And at the higher end, she's going to need a little over 1.7. So what are we actually saying here? Well, we'll talk about where those come from in a second. But what we're looking at in this chart is if Beatrice saves at $5,000 every year, how much will she have in a given year based off of that expected rate of return? So in 2025, she started with $48,500, and that's true regardless of what she plans to save. If she saves at only her minimum goal and also makes that 7% return, she'll get the $5,000 added on top of this, plus that rate of return, which works out to $56,895. Then she can see what happens if she hits her target goal, and then again, what happens if she hits her stretch goal. Now, what gets interesting is as she scrolls down. So as she scrolls down through this chart, it all looks the same until she starts to get closer to those retirement years. So Beatrice can now see that in 2054, at age 60, if she continues to save at her stretch savings goal rate, she will hit her lowest nest egg need number by the time she's 60. So her lowest nest egg need is 1.3. So anything over 1.3 but less than the medium is going to be yellow. So 1.393, 1.502. So both of those are kind of in the low nest egg need range. And she starts to get even more, of course, as she gets older. So she'll actually hit her highest nest egg need if she saves at her stretch goal by age 64. Obviously, minimum's not going to be enough. And we can also see that it's pulled in her goal retirement year, which is 65 here. So this can make her feel pretty good, right? She can say like, all right, if I just do my target, I'm going to hit my highest nest egg need estimate by that year. Now, it's really important to understand something. The first is that your nest egg needs are going to change. So as your income changes, as your expenses change, your nest egg need is going to grow. And that's why retirement planning as a process is so important. It's a process, not an event, because as her nest egg needs change, she wants to understand how her current savings rates get her to whatever her nest egg need is then. So if you want to see a realistic understanding of exactly how this chart can change over the years, I would recommend clicking in to see some examples here where we actually go through sort of a typical person's or a possible reasonable sort of average person's lifestyle. So earlier in their life, they're probably going to make less money, but their expenses will also be lower. So you can kind of see how that works out in terms of projecting future goals. But what's really important is that the ultimate goal, and it might not happen right away, but the ultimate goal is to have whatever the savings are get you to a place of hitting one of your nest egg needs by your goal timeline. So a very helpful tool to get to understand how you're setting yourself up for the future. So now let's talk a little bit more about where these projections come from. So we're going to go to the summary tab, and I want to break this down. So the first thing is your nest egg needs. And we're going to tell you right at the outset, we estimate your retirement nest egg needs to be between, in this case, Beatrice's case, 1.3 million and 1.8 million. And then we also say, in today's dollars, so you don't need to factor in inflation. We've already we're looking at today's dollars. This would provide between 53 and 70,000 of annual income from your nest egg alone. Now, again, if you're getting $1,000 a month from Social Security, then you can lump on $12,000 on top of that, but or other sources of income. So that's super helpful information. We're telling you how much you could reasonably expect and how much you think you might actually be able to get. Now, you also have the ability to tweak your needs. So if you look here at percentage of pre-retirement income desired, it says for many, expenses go down in retirement. Depending on your lifestyle, experts typically estimate needs between 70 and 100%. And so you actually have the ability to change your nest egg needs. And each of these goals, so minimum, target, and optimal, each affect represent the sort of respective columns over here: lowest need, medium, and highest. So if you're like, you know what, I think I would be totally happy living a more bare bones lifestyle. I think I could totally survive on 70% of my pre-retirement income. Change this to 70, and let's see what it does. So right now it's at 1.3 at 80%. If Beatrice changes it to 70, it gets on to 1.244. Now, obviously, if your retirement nest egg need projections go up, a 10% change could potentially change this substantially more. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, if you're one of these people who's like, yeah, I want to retire and I want to be flying on National Geographic private jet tours around the world and seeing the seven wonders of the world every month and things like that, fantastic. What you're probably going to be focused on is this optimal or high nest egg need number. And you might think, you know what, I might be spending more in retirement. I might be spending 120% of my current income. And you can see how that affects your nest egg needs there as well. Now, when you make these changes, it will affect the numbers that you see projected in future outlook as well. So any place you see your nest egg needs estimates, we can see this is now up to 1.9. But if we go back here and change this to just 100, it's going to be 1.7, and that will be reflected on the future outlook table as well. So this is the place where you have the ability to modify and change what we think your nest egg needs will be. So you do have some flexibility there. You also have this experimentation box. So your nest egg needs, or your lifestyle is going to change. And so your nest egg may change too, or in fact, it definitely will. And so you might just say, just for playing around, I want to understand what happens if my income goes up $30,000. Well, you can see that's going to affect the nest egg needs right there. What happens if my expenses go up by $20,000? That's going to affect the needs there too. What if Social Security actually is the $1,500 that I was expecting and not the $1,000? That's going to drop it because, again, there's going to be other sources of income to make up for the difference there. So this is a place where you can freely just sort of play around with your numbers, see how it affects your potential nest egg needs. I would always suggest once you're done playing around, just click reset, and that's going to pull these numbers back to the values that you had entered on step one. So household income and expenses, these numbers are coming from the My Info tab, and then you can play around with it and click reset. Okay, those are your nest egg needs. One thing I do want to point out is how these are calculated. We have a detailed article that talks about the math in much more detail than I'm going to do now, but I do want to give you the short version. So when nest egg needs are calculated for retirement, there are sort of multiple sort of well-established rules of thumb. But within these rules of thumb, there's usually sort of high, medium, and low targets. And the different rules of thumb may work better for different people depending on, their life and their circumstances and a variety of factors. So what MoneySwell has done is we have taken each of these sort of high, medium, and low estimates from each of these different methodologies. And then we have averaged each of those methodologies sort of high, medium, and low numbers and produced our own high, medium, and low numbers. And so what this does is that, well, first of all, I just want to state we've worked with multiple certified financial planners to validate that this is a reasonable approach and that it's producing reasonable numbers. If anything, the feedback that we got on this model was that it might be a little bit more conservative. In other words, it might be telling you that you need a little bit more than you actually do. But the main thing is that these are just estimates, right? You just want to get a sense through the MoneySwell Retirement Planner tool. Am I saving enough? Am I sort of setting myself up for success? If you're, decades away from retirement, that's going to be more than enough to put you in a good spot. But as you get closer, if you're maybe just a few years from retirement, we would highly recommend working with a certified financial planner to just maybe potentially refine your saving strategy a little bit towards the end. But they're also going to be super helpful in terms of helping you figure out how to draw down those funds. And again, that gets into things like looking at pre-tax versus post-tax dollars and all those sorts of things. But the point is that MoneySwell is a planning tool to help you set yourself up for success in a really easy way. But as you get a little closer to retirement, certainly consider working with a certified financial planner. So last section in the retirement planner tool is historical progress. And there's a few things about this that I absolutely love and a few things that I love, but they're also very basic. So the values and contributions by year, this chart is pretty straightforward, showing what was the value of your nest egg at any given point of time. And that's going to be this sort of teal blue color here. And then what were your contributions? And that's represented by the purple dots and the y-axis over on the right. Of course, as you hover over, just like with all our charts, you can see exactly how that changes those values. Down below, you're going to see the sort of data chart that corresponds with the visual chart. You'll see household income for a given year. You'll see the retirement contributions that you had for a given year. You'll see your savings rate, pretty straightforward. It's just going to be a calculation of dividing your contributions divided by your income. And then you'll see the ending value of your assets for that year. So again, this value is going to be whatever MoneySwell has from December 31st of that year. What was the ending value in 2019? For Beatrice, it was 8,100. Obviously, you can see this is dummy data because we've got very round numbers here, but you can understand how that works. So those are pretty straightforward, but there are two things I want to point out. One, investment growth rate, and then two, the annualized average row. So as is the case for Beatrice, as would be the case for anyone, there are going to be years where she performed really well. And again, this is all just dummy data, but in this year, in 2020, she had a 24.8% rate of return, but she also has had some years where she's lost some. Now, this is very valuable information, but what's almost even more valuable than this is the annualized average rate of return. Now, this is a number that I'm just going to make up a percentage here. 99.9% of people don't know this number, but it's such an important number. And the reason it's important is this. Your goal, of course, should be to invest smart. Now, depending on your strategy, your stage of life, that might mean something a little different for different people. So, for example, you might be willing to sacrifice some returns in terms of the performance of your portfolio for a little less volatility, right? Especially if you're older. You don't want it to go up 20% one year and down 20% the next. You might be happier with making a little bit less, but having a narrower range of volatility. Maybe when you're younger, volatility doesn't matter as much. And so you want to just maximize on returns. But your goal should be to get something close to average market returns. Now, when we talk about average market returns, we're talking about things like the S&P 500. We're talking about sort of index funds that span, a good chunk of the market or the total market. If you're getting something that's completely different, you might want to take a little closer look at your investing strategy. So, for example, if you're one of these people who's kind of trading the latest meme stock or that thing that your neighbor told you about, there's a really good chance that you're performing worse than the market overall, and maybe substantially so. Now, of course, you might have a few good years, you might get lucky, but in the long term, this is not going to be a winning strategy. And I can say this confidently because it, it's very well known that there are almost no professional investors, people who focus 100% of their time on the market, who consistently outperform the market over long periods of time. So again, the big takeaway here, and if you read the MoneySwell articles in the action plan or in our blog, active trading tends to result in poor performance for your portfolio. So again, you might get lucky in the short term. You might have a few picks that do really well, but whatever your strategy is, you need the data to understand how your decisions for investing are stacking up against average market rates of return. And if you see that this number is, you know, 4% or maybe even negative, especially if you have several years of data, that's an indication that you're probably not investing very wisely. So this is a nice gut check. And again, it's really easy for us to remember, depending on your personality, it may be really easy for us to remember our successes and sort of downplay the areas where we didn't perform as well. But by having this annualized average, we're going to have a very accurate view of, hey, how are we actually performing, not just in the years that we did really well, but also in those years that we did poorly. So that's one thing. This number right here helps you to invest smart. The second thing that that number does is it can give us a barometer for projecting accurately. And so, as you may recall, when we were on our future outlook table in step two, I'll just collapse this one. When we were in our future outlook table, it asks us for that expected rate of return. In this case, we have 7%. Now, you may say 7% because that's what the market typically is doing. But if you are actually trading those meme stock, you might be getting way less than that. You might be getting a 3% rate of return or worse. But if you're using 7 or 8 or 9% projection, what you're doing is you're telling yourself you're being too optimistic. You're saying I'm going to get these 8% returns, but the way you're actually investing is not producing that. And so this chart would be giving you a rosier picture than you otherwise would. So most people just take a total guess at this number. They plug in the average market rate of return and they call it a day. What MoneySwell does for you, though, is it actually gives you a sense of what your personal performance is. And the cool thing is, it's doing it across all of your retirement accounts, not just a single one. So, surprisingly, a lot of retirement plan providers don't give you a super clear and obvious way to see your actual individual rate of return. And even if they do, if you have a retirement accounts at multiple institutions or even within the same one, oftentimes it's not an aggregate rate of return. So that's one of the things that MoneySwell gives you that you're not going to get elsewhere. Now, it's worth noting, this is super important. The more data you have in MoneySwell, obviously if you have 1 year of data, this annualized average is going to be the same as that single year. And that year may be a really good year or a really bad year. So initially this number might not be super valuable, but as you build up more data, you're going to start to get a much clearer picture. So if you're 40, for example, and you just started MoneySwell, you might be, darn, I only have like 1 year of data in MoneySwell. That's not super useful. Don't forget that you have the ability to add historical years. So if you started investing when you were 25 and you're 40 now, you've got 15 years of data that you could potentially enter in here. And it's not hard to do. When you click to add a historical year, you obviously are going to tell it the year that you entered. You're going to enter your household income. You can look at this through tax returns. Also, if you create an account on SSA.gov, the Social Security site, it'll give you a number. You can look at your retirement contributions for any year, and then you can look at the ending value across your accounts, add those up, and put that in. So in just a couple minutes, you should be able to get pretty accurate data for as many years as you want. You could go back all the way to whenever you first started earning and contributing towards retirement. So that can help you as you're starting to understand what has my market rate, what has my annualized average been over the long term. So super cool thing that MoneySwell has that is not very present in most other tools. So hopefully you find that useful. That's the retirement planner tool. I'm going to jump back to our presentation because I've been talking for quite a bit, and we'll wrap it up here. All right, we already talked about quick demo videos are available on our YouTube channel and in the app itself. But let's talk about some key takeaways. So the first is that saving, investing, and planning for retirement, it's not an event. It's a process. And the MoneySwell tool, again, portions of it you'll update once a year, portions of it you'll be prompted to update on a monthly basis, but you're going to have a very clear picture of where you sit based off of your lifestyle today, what you might need in retirement. And secondly, again, your lifestyle, your income, your expenses, it's going to change significantly over the years. So consistently making those updates to your planner is going to give you that sense of whether or not you're on track. And then lastly, knowing that estimated rate of return across all your retirement accounts is really important. And so if you're finding that you're not performing, in some years, if the market goes down 10%, and you went down 20%, you might want to take a look at your investing strategy. Similarly, if it's up and you're up, but maybe not as much, you want to have an investing strategy that in general approximates overall market performance. Of course, if you do better than that, great, but you may also be taking on more risk, and that may come back to bite you years down the line. If you want to learn more about the MoneySwell Retirement Planner, how we're estimating things like your average market rate of return, things like that, definitely read our articles. They're all linked within the tool. We think we're doing some really innovative things there that are helping people to get that sort of good enough number, even though it is an estimate. But we're really proud of that, and we think it's really useful. So thank you for joining. As a reminder, if you are not currently a MoneySwell customer, MoneySwell starts with that 34-day free trial. You do not need to enter a credit card. We want you to get value out of it. We're not trying to get people to sign up for a subscription that they're going to forget about. So sign up, get that 34-day free trial. There's no risk to you whatsoever. And if you like it, if you're getting value out of it, sign up for an annual plan, and you can use the code WEB15 and you'll get 15% off your first year. So that works out to $80.75 a year, $673 a month. And we certainly think there's a good return on investment there as well. Again, thank you for joining our webinar today. And if you're watching the replay, thank you very much for that. And we look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon.